It's May 23, Ukraine Media Center Ukrinform continues its operation. My name is Anastasia Pampukha, and now we are going to have a roundtable discussion titled Success and Challenges of Rehabilitation of Military Personnel in Ukraine, Looking for Solutions. Let me introduce our speakers today, who are numerous. Joining us are Natalia Kalmykova, Deputy Minister of Defense of Ukraine for Social Development, Vasyl Strilka, Director of the Department for High-Tech Medical Care and Innovation at the Ministry of Health, Ksenia Voznitsyna, Chief Doctor at the Lisova Polyana Veterans Mental Health and Rehabilitation Center, Valeriya Pavlenko, journalist at text.org.ua, author of multiple comprehensive series publications relating to the advancements and obstacles the military faces during rehabilitation, Anastasia Pampukha, strategic advisor on policy development and legal support of the Rehabilitation of War Trauma Initiative, Ihor Chernetskyi, head of the Center for Anti-Terrorist Operation Participants and Their Families, Banderivsky Shron, and Ulyana Bakh, project director at IREX. Well, I think that before we proceed to the discussion, probably it would be good to mention the study made by text.org.ua, who studied a lot of the centers established by private organizations, government organizations. And so what were the problems that you were able to identify during your research, and what are the conclusions that we can draw? Well, the presentation is on the screen. Good. So, good morning, everybody. Let me tell you a little bit about our research. We visited 10 rehabilitation centers and projects, including private ones. We talked to a number of experts, the military who undergo rehabilitation, and we've identified what are the problems in the rehabilitation system. So here are the rehabilitation centers and volunteer projects, including private projects, that we visited and where we were able to discuss things with the military. First, it's Superhumans in Lviv region, Lisova Polyana, who is represented here by Ksenia Voznitsyna. We talked to a therapist, Anton Semenov, representing the project Our Brother, the project Banderivsky Shron, represented by Ihor Chernetskyi here. We talked to a psychologist, Serhiy from Ulyana Center. Then we visited the Ulyana Center itself, where we were able to talk to physical therapists and the administration. Then we visited Central Legion in Chernihiv and Church Brass Center, Transcarpathian Mental Health Center in Ivano-Frankivsk region, and we've also visited the city of Slavutich. Having discovered some information about the system of rehabilitation over there. All the materials of the project can be get familiarized with online by that QR code, by that link on the screen. So we've identified a number of problems. For example, I was deeply impressed by the scale of the problem that is not so noticeable in the cities, because a lot of the military with the injuries, they live actually in those rehabilitation centers. They undergo treatment after heavy injury. They get prosthetics in the Unbroken Center in Lviv, for example. This is Mr. Valentin from Lisova Polyana, Forest Lawn. Well, you can see a smiling man in the photo, but as we started talking about his experience of treatment, he was undergoing mental health rehabilitation in Lisova Polyana Center, and I was deeply impressed because he was so easily talking about his depression and the dark period he was going through after he was in the area of battle operations, and then he was able to recuperate. And another problem that I've paid attention to is that the number of affordable good rehabilitation centers is quite limited, because not all of the centers can, for example, provide prosthetic services, because the experts in prosthetics are not sufficient, and it's not everybody who knows about the places where the military may undergo rehabilitation. There are two pictures from Superhumans, the Ulyana Center, and another picture that was provided to me by Banderivsky Shron. So we've identified 7 articles how to improve the system of rehabilitation based on our experience. So first item is the establishment of rehabilitation sections in civilian institutions. And it's important to ensure the access of the military to all of the institutions, both civil and non-civil. For example, in Ulyana Center, I was made aware of such a problem. The center was providing the services before the full-scale invasion, but after the beginning of the full-scale invasion, they started accepting the IDPs and then the military, because the military can undergo rehabilitation in any center, including the civilian ones. Another item is establishment of the network of partner centers in the communities. It means that the centers for rehabilitation are the centers that provide services on social reintegration, those who support the military in search of jobs. We have to make sure that they are united into one network and that the military are aware of them. Another item is expansion of funding. That's something the owners, the directors of those rehabilitation centers need to take care of to make sure that their spaces are more accessible and comfortable. Approval of single rehabilitation procedure. I haven't mentioned it. Some centers, they practice some unproven methods, and it needs to be changed to make sure the military can trust every rehabilitation center. Training of rehabilitation specialists in higher educational institutions. I've already mentioned that we don't have enough prosthetic experts. There is no even such a specialty. It's only in the middle of being prepared, and the Ministry of Education and Science need to move faster in this direction. Professional retraining of the military and their family members. Well, we were told by the military, as they were called cripples and something like that, which is absolutely unacceptable. And we were told that the military are afraid of the psychotherapists, and that is a problem. And the last item is the reintegration of the military into the society. We have to make sure that the military can come back to their communities, re-socialize and reintegrate. Well, that's pretty much it on my end. Thank you very much, Ms. Valeriya. Ms. Natalia. Ms. Valeriya mentioned a number of problems in the area of rehabilitation. We all understand that such an issue may take years to solve, maybe decades. So let me ask you, what are the priorities of the government policy in the area of rehabilitation of the military, at least with the 5 years horizon, and what are the solutions of those problems existing for the time being? Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation. I'm happy to see the representatives of Ministry of Defense and Ministry of Health here. Unfortunately, we don't have representatives of Ministry of Social Policy and Ministry for Veterans Affairs here, which are very important in the context of our conversation. What you were mentioning, it's not only the military, is the different agencies creating service and companies creating services for the military. Also, I think that this study lacks the study of the government policy, because surveying of beneficiaries is important, but it's worth studying the way the network is built. Well, it is already built, and now I think that the representatives of Ministry of Health can inform us on that. Currently, we have 26,000 rehabilitation banks in the system of the healthcare, and for the last year, the rehabilitation in our healthcare institutions that submit to the Ministry of Veterans will more than 20,000 servicemen, because it's only the military who are treated by us. So about 20,000 underwent rehabilitation. That's an important figure, because these years we're talking about huge amount of rehabilitation, whereas Miss Ksenia, for example, works with the military with invisible trauma, and she works with them for a long time, and the scale of the problem has grown multifold. And in view of this problem, for all of the rehabilitation centers, there is a requirement to have multidisciplinary team, and this requirement is being complied with by both the institutions who submit to the Ministry of Health, and they fund it no matter whether it's a civilian or military, because rehabilitation is no different. It doesn't depend on the military or non-military status. Yeah, and it's worth studying too. You know, there is a full-scale aggression going on, and the combat trauma, combat injury is something that not only the military but also the civilians can get. But again, let's provide the floor for the representatives of the Ministry of Health to give us more color on this. The patients are being forwarded for rehabilitation. Of course, there are corner cases when people go home after treatment and they don't know where to go next. So those problems should be worked out on the level of the communities. Talking about the invisible injury and the prosthetics, it's not a necessity for every single rehabilitation center. Unfortunately, I cannot give you the number of the amputees, I mean, in our country, but I was shocked because actually when I found out, because it's a good story, because the number of amputees is way less than I would have expected to see, and our rehabilitation centers allow to preserve their limbs without having them amputated. And now the Ministry for Social Policies works on a legislation to ensure our military can get prosthetics even after the 3-year term's expiration. What else is important? In coordination with the Ministry of Health, with the institutions that are located in the so-called Kiev cluster, in Kiev region, Chernihiv and Cherkasy and Zhytomyr regions. So we're in the middle of experiment on early forecasting of the rehabilitation results and treatment results, and relevant further adaptation of approaches to rehabilitation depending on whether people revert to the military service or they transfer to the civil life, because the experts would agree the mental health treatment should be different. If people revert back to military service, we should keep them in tone that is necessary for the military operations. And the whole different story is when the military retire, and it's our task to find a place to study for them during rehabilitation or after rehabilitation. Also, for the time being, there is a program on the way funded by the NATO office. It's called Recovery Program. That contemplates funding of 5 rehabilitation hospitals in the system of the Ministry of Defense. Now the repair works are underway in one of the hospitals in Kiev region, and with the help of other donors, we're in the middle of repairs in another hospital in Kiev region and yet another one in Vinnytsia region. On top of that, currently there is an information system being built for joint information system being built for Ministry of Defense and Ministry of Health, to make sure that every single one of our defenders enters that system with the information from their civil life, and they live for civil life with the full package of information, and the doctors have all of the database, what, when, was done by whom and why. So this work is currently underway, and I think that within a couple of months our patients will be able to see the changes to this system of rehabilitation. Also, the rehabilitation is going on outside Ukraine in coordination with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Defense and Ministry of Health. We've recently amended the legislation of Ukraine to make sure that the military are allowed to undergo the treatment abroad for 12 months, and after that the people undergo the medical commission to identify the need for prolonged treatment or rehabilitation. Previously, the military had to be resigned in compliance with the law, and now this issue is standardized. On top of that, now we send the explanations to the military units on how to accrue the salaries for those service people who undergo long-term rehabilitation, and I hope that civil organizations, international organizations will be involved in further building of this network. We need to build small centers that are close to the places of residence of those people, but it's more about veterans rather than the military, which means that people retired from the military service and are back to their communities. And I hope that Texty.org will continue monitoring the situation, and we will see the following iterations of this study within a half a year and then a year and so on and so forth. And I also want to mention that the President signed a law that discerns the functionality of the healthcare facilities between the Ministry of Defense and Ministry of Health. And now we've issued the new protocols for trauma. I think there are 7 more protocols that are currently being prepared that would allow provision of the medical aid and similar procedures in all of the institutions using verified, medically proven methods. And that's the single medical space that we built for our defenders in coordination with other government agencies. Well, you brought us to the question to the representative of the Ministry of Health. So, Mr. Vasyl, what is the system of rehabilitation centers? How is it built in Ukraine? And the specialists of those rehabilitation centers, how does the experience exchange is going on? How is their training going on? Dear colleagues, we have to understand where we've started. The normal start of rehabilitation of Ukraine, for example, physical therapist positions started to be implemented only in 2016, 2017. Some countries were doing it for decades, and it's only the invasion of Russians in 2014 that provided us with impetus to implement such positions. So for some countries it has taken decades, and for us we are forced to do it quite shortly. So talking about the establishment of networks, the policy of Ministry of Health is such that in every cluster and multi-specialty institution, for example, those who cure trauma or stroke, there should be a rehabilitation department. Currently, there are 198 such hospitals, and such departments operate in 115 of them. But on top of that, we have other institutions who are not multi-cluster, but they have rehabilitation departments, and rehabilitation is being paid through National Healthcare Service of Ukraine according to the packages, stationary and ambulatory. Talking about the stationary package, in Ukraine there are 295 healthcare institutions who have agreements for stationary package. For talking about ambulatory package, is 452 institutions. So talking about the drawdown, we have to take the drawdown from this pool of institutions to make proper conclusions about bottlenecks where we have to solve some problems. But what we understand, the challenges that we're facing, it's not the walls that rehabilitate the people, but it's the experts, it's the teams of experts and their requirements when we talk about the single rehabilitation procedure. So basic requirement, if the patient is at stationary rehabilitation, they are supposed to get 3 hours of rehabilitation per day. So that's basic. If this basis does not exist, we shouldn't even start talking about anything else. If there are no specialists who can ensure those 3 hours per day, that's basic. So we verify the capacity of the system, we check what is the number of specialists who are contracted for stationary package and what is the number of hours of rehabilitation they can provide. And thus we come to a number of patients who can be provided with rehabilitation support per day. And as soon as we calculate it, we see that our system can provide rehabilitation support to more than 9,000 patients, well, by the number of specialists who are employed in the institutions. But on the other hand, we understand that there are specialists who were involved in rehabilitation support for a long time, who were developing themselves, but there are also specialists who just joined the healthcare system and their level is completely different. And there are patients who end up in the institutions where the head of the rehabilitation department is cool, where the feedback is cool, where the team is cool, but there are patients who end up in other institutions where the team is not so motivated or is just new, and they say that nothing happens to us. So the government pays the same in both cases and they are subject to the same procedures and policies. And it's a question that we should ask the directors of the hospitals, like, what are you doing to make sure that the rehabilitation is going on in a proper way? Say, let's go to the regional Ivano-Frankivsk hospital. The department, the rehabilitation department there is wonderful. Their team is exchanging experience with the specialists all across the world. And we may go to another hospital where the conditions are more or less the same, but nothing is going on there. And our task is to make sure that the director of or the owner of that institution understands that it's their responsibility. We cannot sit by their side and tell them, like, come on, treat the patient. It's impossible to implement it physically. So maybe it's some KPI system that can be implemented on the state level. We're moving in this direction. We've even we've even asked one organization who are involved in measurement and scaling, but again there are some risks. We can write a lot on paper, but it will be different from what's going on in real life. So the feedback from the patients, their communication with the owners of the institution plays a crucial role. But what do we do to let them improve? So there are teams that are motivated from abroad, and it makes sense for them going abroad because they've learned their maximum in Ukraine, and then they come back from that retraining abroad and they become even more apt in their specialty. But there are teams for whom it's too early to go abroad. They haven't even acquired that amount of knowledge that they can acquire in Ukraine, and to do that we've established 7 excellence centers. The retraining centers in Ukraine, for example, like the one existing in Lisova Polyana, so the specialists from one center come to that another center to retrain, so that those who are better qualified train those who have weaker skills. Talking about funding, well, talking about everything that's going on in the rehabilitation sphere, I can explain the logic why, as a Ministry of Health, we take this or that decision. So talking about funding, last year we were facing a problem when difficult patients were difficultly accepted by the centers. There were very specific departments for whom it was interested to treat the difficult patients. Why the situation was like that? Because through the National Healthcare Service we were paying the same. For example, a patient with the ache in their back and with the spine injury were paid for the same. So why should we rehabilitate a more difficult patient if we can get the same amount of money for an easier patient? So this year we've solved this problem. Our task is to change the behavior of the providers so that they have additional motivation. So we've gathered all the experts and we told them these are the codes for rehabilitation patients. So break them down into 3 groups. One group is those difficult you don't want to accept. Another group is like those you don't want to accept but you still accept them. And the third group is those that you accept eagerly. So we've broken them down into 3 groups, and this we say, all right, for the easiest group is paid the lowest, and the most difficult pays the biggest. And it changed their behavior because to make more money for the institution, the only honest way to do it is to provide the rehabilitation support to the most difficult patients, because we understand there is a dependency between the capacity, like the patient is supposed to get 3 hours of rehabilitation per day, and it's directly connected with the number of employed patients. If you have a team, you can calculate what is the number of patients that can be provided with this service per day. Every difficult patient, for example, is paid better than the easier one, and thus we solve the problem with the difficult patients that nobody wanted really to take care of. And now we can afford routine patients, for example, with spinal injuries. And in coordination with the Ministry of Defense, there is information submitted for the veterans with spinal injuries. So they are forwarded either to excellence centers or to other rehabilitation centers. The procedure does not work quite perfectly so far, and there is such a logic behind what we do. Thank you, Mr. Vasyl, for explaining this system. Hopefully it will even work better in future. And now I would like to ask the representatives of the rehabilitation centers, the efficient ones, not those mentioned by Mr. Vasyl in a negative way. So, Lisova Polyana, Ms. Ksenia, can you please tell us about your center? What do you do? What's your place in the system of rehabilitation? Mr. Vasyl has also mentioned that you share your experience actively, so can you please tell us the way it happens? Well, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm sorry. I have a right and experience to mention some specific things. I work with the military, with the veterans for the last 10 years. I see what was going on in the years 14, 15. I know what was going on during the years 17, 18, and I'm seeing what's going on now. And the postulate, the universal postulate works here, that crisis is not always bad. It creates impetus for the development of different areas. I see this development in a lot of ways. I see a lot of gaps here, a lot of miscalculations. There are institutions, there are personalities. Well, we're not gonna get away from it. We're developing. We're in the middle of it, but as a practitioner, let me tell you, as the neurologist, as a doctor, physical therapy, physical rehabilitation in Ukraine made a quantum leap in Ukraine, and it's no exaggeration. I'm absolutely proud of those teams. I know them all personally, all of the excellent centers that work now. I know that it's a titanic work. I mean, in terms of not only treatment and rehabilitation of the military, but I see it through the social networks of my friends and colleagues. Like, we have this new patient coming to our center, you know, and they start working over that patient as a beehive. They are all around them, and now it's only a lazy doctor who would not want to get some additional education, some additional training. There's a lot of international organizations who support us in that, you know, horizontal exchange between the teams, and the exchange of experience with the foreign doctors abroad, you know. I'm even a little bit envious about the way they work. Yeah, I recall years 14, 15 with my colleagues, psychotherapists, when we had nothing, and now more and more opportunities for treatment of the veterans are added. And I know that the huge role was played by the First Lady program, How Are You, Brother? So the principles of treatment of the mental health treatment on the global level are changing. So talking about the work in Lisova Polyana, there's the experience of trauma therapists all around the world. I mean, psychological trauma that was acquired during traumatic experiences of war is a whole different category of mental health disorders. We're not talking about something organic like bipolar or schizophrenia. That's the trauma that was acquired as a result of traumatic events, and the approaches for treatment of such trauma should be cardinally different from the treatment of other types of trauma. What's also interesting about the invisible injury is that here the work does not depend on some ultra-modern cutting-edge rehabilitation center. No, we don't need a lot of them. It's the work of the whole society. We need this work on all of the levels. It's the communities, your profession, your collective, whether you are able to change your profession, are you going to have normal relations in your family? Unfortunately, such disorders cannot be treated with time. Sometimes they may last for long. And those are different levels of the mental health pyramid that should be developed in a diffusive way, you know, in all directions at the same time. So what's good from what we're observing today? Thanks to Ministry of Health input, there are changes to the approaches to mental health treatment. The centers are organized in a lot of centers which are close to the places of residence of the veterans and the military, and I think it's a breakthrough, yet another breakthrough is that the family doctors are being trained in discerning and identifying the mental health disorders in people. Well, obviously it's not perfect, but the fact itself that the family doctors get such training, it's a unique opportunity that we've never witnessed within the last 10 years. There's still a lot of work to be done, but still. And talking about our center, the 6 excellence centers, they are all for physical rehabilitation and physical therapy, and our center is the Excellence Center for Invisible Injury. It's a specialized center, and we don't need to have them coming in large numbers. We need a couple of such centers that may use non-classic approaches to psychotherapy with preserving the holistic approach based on understanding of trauma, the understanding of traumatic situation that people experienced and unfortunately continue to experience. And very frequently the foreign relations specialists keep asking us frequently, how are you able to make it during the active phase of war? Let me give you an simple example. Starting from year 2018, Sergei was at war. He was back at the front lines in 2022 with existing trauma. They've got additionally traumatized that resulted in diagnosing them with PTSD, which made them unfit for further military service. We tried to treat them. The process is going pretty successfully, but just last week Sergei gets the news about his mother, who was remaining in temporarily occupied territories, perished, and they try to organize the burial of their mother online, remotely, and all of our work on rehabilitation turns out to be vain after that. And in order to cope with such challenges, we have to get more training, additional training, and my colleagues, the psychologists, may confirm it that the amount of available trainings, they allow people to improve their skills again. Vasyl said it right, it's a human factor. If people want to provide help, they will look for improvement of their skills. But if people treat their specialization formally, there is no Ministry of Social Policy or Ministry of Economy who will force those people to work better, to bend them, so to say. And Lisova Polyana now serves as a training base for multiple experts, not only for them but also for the veterans' family members. For example, now we have a big team undergoing a half-year course Equal to Equal, thanks to IREX. By the way, thank you. It's a fundamental course for the people who retired due to the trauma of war in years 22-23, but after acquisition of such skill, they can come to their communities and start providing aid to the same type of warriors and their family members, those who are retiring. War is real bad, but the crisis allows us to move faster. Thank you, Miss Ksenia, Miss Anastasia. The floor is yours. Can you please tell us about your initiative for rehabilitation of the war trauma? How do the specialists improve their experience and skills, and how do you coordinate it with the Ministry of Health to make sure that the local success gets scaled up? Thank you very much for having me at this round table. We understand it's very important under the conditions of the war. Rehabilitation is one of the biggest areas we have to develop in our country. Well, talking about your questions, communication with the Ministry of Health, Rehabilitation of Trauma of War is at the highest level, at the best level. The Ministry of Health formulates their policies, and we try to support them with all of our efforts. Talking about training of specialists, first of all, with the support of our partners, and under the aegis of the Ministry of Health, there were multiple trainings developed. There are webinars going on. The specialists had opportunity to undergo training in Kiev Mohila Mini Business Academy School, or whatever it's called. So basically, there's a lot of activities, training activities for specialists in the rehabilitation area, but let's not forget about the formal education. I'm talking the higher educational institutions. There are certain gaps in this system so far, but I hope that our initiative for rehabilitation of the trauma of war, and with the support of the Ministry of Education and Science and the Ministry of Health, we will be able to overcome the problems in training of specialists. So what are the activities that exist in our country for the time being? There are educational standards being developed for the speaking therapies. There are standards developed for prosthetics specialists. There will be more training programs developed, and recently there were amendments. Probably there is an education standard being developed for physical therapists that should be added to language therapists. So I hope that, using those baby steps, but quite active baby steps, we will be able to achieve certain movements. I said tectonic movements. And this professional standard should lay the foundation to make sure that every specialist who plans training in this field of for example, language therapists, they should understand what are the responsibilities of those language therapists, what they actually do. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Miss Anastasia. Mr. Ihor, you are the main Banderivets of Banderivsky Shron, or God forbid it, so please tell us about your experience. What is the experience of civil initiatives in the area of rehabilitation of the military? Well, good morning. Thank you for having me. Quite an interesting question. So, look, on top of being an organization working in rehabilitation since 2016, we work in mental health rehabilitation. And we don't only do that, we work with the veterans in crisis. I'm not going to say a lot about the military, but the crisis situations are the dependencies, the mental health disorders such as bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, PTSD. In the majority of cases, we were seeing it as the lightest condition, because 90% of those who were our patients, they were officially diagnosed with PTSD directly related to combat, and not those that were triggered by the combat. Well, no matter how surprising it sounds, but starting from 2022, we were not in operation. In fact, because as veterans organization, all of us, we ceased to be veterans and we switched back to active duty on the 24th of February 2022. So out of my team, out of 5 psychologists, I'm only having one in Ivano-Frankivsk for that. Now there is another one who got retired recently. So I think that we will be able to reestablish our work on a more serious basis. So we haven't been doing anything serious during the year 22-23 but before that, unfortunately, we were the only institution that accepted the veterans for treatment, for a long-term treatment. We were accepting veterans for half a year and longer. We worked in coordination with Ksenia before for a long time, and I don't even know how to develop this subject. Well, talking about the military, I mean the active duty, the situation with physical rehabilitation and mental health rehabilitation is more or less okay, but the situation is way worse with the veterans, and it keeps deteriorating because as soon as a person retires from military service, veteran ends up in their community, and no matter what other declarations about the support to such veterans, unfortunately they're not getting any support of that kind. And I would like obviously to see the representatives of the Ministry of Veterans and Ministry of Social Policy, because the veterans is their responsibility. We try to change things in our level, somewhere in the bottom, but thanks to the fact that we work in this area, I mean in Western Ukraine, all of the heads of the departments, they know my phone number, but again, it's a drop in the sea. We cannot even cope with those problems that exist for the time being. We were trying to undertake complex approach to our work, always because mental health is as I think is one of the most difficult areas of rehabilitation. The Carpathian Center for Mental Health, we worked with them starting from 2016. We work with Ivano-Frankivsk Regional Hospital, with Katerina, deputy head of the department. But again, even during physical rehabilitation, it requires a lot of mental health support, but the existing number of specialists is definitely not sufficient. It would be way easier if they would come in large numbers. Well, I can talk on this subject around. Because again, with the active military, before they start being deemed unfit, that there is some time during which we still can pull them to ourselves, but after they retire and they get back to their communities, some communities are real remote, and we can only get eventually a notification on suicide. So I don't know, probably talking about all of the ministries whose responsibility is that we have to create some joint, I don't know, some joint windows, some joint ministry to coordinate all this thing. Yes, this work is underway with the ministries, and that's yet another breakthrough. Well, it's cool, real cool. Well, what can I say? We're going to develop, we're going to expand, we're going to keep doing our thing. We have plans for this. We have support by the veterans organizations from Canada, from the United States, who were the last ones that we were talking with. They were French. Well, they're used to working with veterans organizations. We submit reports on spending of funding. We are going to expand our activities because I'm a keen adherent of the idea of establishment of multiple small institutions, crisis institutions. Well, it's like the lowest level. Not so much people wanted to undertake. It's a long-term work from 6 months and maybe until the end of the life, but sometimes You have to give the magic kick to a person. Thank you, Mr. Ihor. Ms. Ulyana, you're responsible for international aid. So what is the vision of international organizations in terms of support of Ukraine in the context of rehabilitation of the military and veterans? Well, thank you very much for this question. I'm real humbled to be here, to be able to listen to this important discussion, and I would like to highlight a little bit different side, the role of international organizations in the system of rehabilitation of veterans and the active military in Ukraine. IREX works on reintegration of veterans starting from 2019, but after the beginning of the full-scale invasion, we started working more actively in rehabilitation, and we work with the Resilience Center at Lisova Polyana, and we will continue expanding our activity in this network. Why is it important? Because it's not only IREX who has this strategy, but other international donors too, because the scale of need for rehabilitation is increasing. More and more donors and international organizations decided to channel their resources to that area. So where the lack of funding was mentioned and the lack of other resources, it's important to strategically include that factor of cooperation with the international organizations. I would like to emphasize a couple of elements here. A lot of resources coming from the international organizations is supposed to be used on a strategic level, and the risk is high when non-strategic use of the resources may result in something non-useful or even in harm. And it's important for the state to undertake leadership here, to work with international donors to make sure that all of the foundations, international programs that come to Ukraine, that they are based on the real needs of Ukraine, to make sure that there is coordination between all of the stakeholders, civil organizations, veteran communities, international organizations, to make sure that the use of resources is happening where it's needed, so we don't have those SQ initiatives when someone has a lot of resources and some is deprived of resources. And what I also need to mention, as Mr. Vasyl has said, Ukraine is currently in the middle of undergoing something that other countries were going for decades. We're going through it within years, and it's important for us to understand that exchanging this experience, we have to understand not every single experience is important for us, especially when we talk about, say, mental health rehabilitation. We just cannot undertake someone else's experience. We have to adapt that experience for ourselves. We have to understand how to ensure that our veterans, the military, and the civilians who are in need of such services, that they get what they need and not some random techniques that are inadequate in our conditions. And another thing I wanted to mention, we were talking about rehabilitation centers. Rehabilitation does not end at that moment when a patient leaves the rehabilitation center. So we're supposed to talk about reintegration and rehabilitation systems, which start with the family, where the veterans continue their rehabilitation with their families. So it's about the communities, and when we talk about the communities, we talk about the systems of psychosocial support, healthcare, but also it's about employment. We have to mention the state level. It's very important in that field, because taking into account with the demographic, the economic situation in our country, I think that every single citizen of Ukraine is very important as a resource, and as a society we have to ensure that every single individual is in possession of all of the opportunities to lead normal life. This barrier-free space, our approach to the people with disabilities should be changed. We can work together with Ukrainian international partners from different sectors. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Ulyana. Mr. Vasyl, I would like to ask you a question. We've heard many different problems that were highlighted by civil organizations and initiatives. We've heard the opinion of international organizations, and it looks like we have to review the whole system of rehabilitation in Ukraine. It's about decentralization to establish those centers somewhere in remote communities. It's about the use of resources, the systems of control, something that was mentioned, like that the rehabilitation is not over after people are out of the rehabilitation centers. Is there an opportunity to legally establish this system on a legal level, first of all, in view of the number of people that are supposed to undergo rehabilitation? Well, this approach was reviewed like a year and a half ago, when the Ministry of Health declared that we establish the departments in the regional hospitals. This is the element of decentralization that you've mentioned, and we bet on it because we had questioned how many, for example, oncological centers can be built in the regions, or should we build rehabilitation departments in many smaller hospitals? Well, if there is a patient who comes to ICU with a stroke, the doctors try to save their life there, and right on that phase the rehabilitation specialists are supposed to work on them. Maybe not for a long period, maybe a couple of minutes per day, to reduce the risk of irreversible complications. And in real life, what we've seen is that the institutions, like for example Ivano-Frankivsk Regional Department or Dnipro Hospital number 4 or Mental Health Hospital of Vinnytsia region, when we talk with the patients from those institutions and when we talk to the specialists from those institutions, the doctors are interested to come to ICU because they understand that those same patients will end up in their section and they will have to work with them. And in those institutions where rehabilitation center is apart, there are no doctors to visit those patients in the ICU. Yeah, there may be a declared specialist. The institution shows they have that physical therapist, for example, they have the stroke center, they have ICU, but in fact no one takes care of the patient there. Because why? They don't have this intrinsic motivation to take care of the patients, to work with them. This is why we're saying that the rehabilitation is supposed to be starting during the acute period, and the rehabilitation department should be a part of that institution where the patients will be transferred to after the acute period. So this is the period during which the efforts of the team yield the best result. Will be because if the rehabilitation goes on in the communities, imagine you bring a paralyzed person to a community, to their family, what happens next? Nothing, right? So this is why we work on building rehabilitation departments in every single hospital and to populate it with personnel. Well, in year 22 we had single package, we didn't break it down into stationary and ambulatory. Well, and we've seen that the specialists do not really want to take care of the stationary rehabilitation. And then the heads of the hospitals, the owners, they started hiring the doctors to make sure that they comply with the requirements of the National Healthcare Service. And talking about year 22, such number was about 4,000, and now we have more than 9,000 of them. And again, as I've mentioned, the specialists have different skills, so and provide different quality of services. So what happens in the community after persons are out of the hospitals, after the treatment? They are being let go home, and in order to prevent the reverse process, we have this option of ambulatory rehabilitation that is paid for by the National Healthcare Service of Ukraine. Those services can be broken down, not every single day, but when we say like at least 14 days, it can happen like say once per week, 2 times per week. It can be extended in time, and the community, they already have tools that they can use for payment as the financial tools, and it's already the responsibility of the community to operate it in a proper way. Again, we all operate within the single medical space. We don't have differentiation for payment, either for rehabilitation of civils or military. Well, for example, if it's a spine injury, if it's a difficult patient, the state pays 44,100 hryvnias for rehabilitation cycle, which lasts at least 14 days. If it's a cranial injury, the state pays 36,000 for 14 days of rehabilitation, and there can be 8 such cycles per year. If it's, for example, back pain, it's 15,800 hryvnias. Again, something that I've mentioned in the beginning. We've broken the patients down into 4 categories. Those are the tools that we provide to the providers of medical aid. Talking about international aid, well, it's colossal. All of the world tries to help us. We have all of the options available for us, like retraining in Oxford, Harvard, other big universities of the world. With the support of World Health Organization, we're developing the rehabilitation center in Kleven for spinal injury, and after a couple of months of training by the foreign specialists, one of those trainers was the president of the Global or American Association for Spinal Injury. That person was training us specialists for a couple of months, and our specialists from Kleven now come to other institutions training other Ukrainian experts on how to treat the spinal injury. So this is the importance of international support. Yet another important thing is when our specialists go for a training abroad, and as a Ministry of Health we communicate with a lot of countries: Norway, Germany, France, Japan, Australia, Italy, United States, of course. And in the majority of countries, is either that our specialists have already visited or are planning to visit. So again, we say we are ready to invest in your training, but let us know what do you want to learn, because we don't want to bring anybody like to some abstract training. We have to know that, okay, we know this, and we want to undergo the acute rehabilitation for difficult patients for ICU. We want to visit this specific training center in Denmark. The Minister of Foreign Affairs comes to the Minister of Foreign Affairs in Denmark, and in the end of summer, our team is going there for retraining. We have a lot of opportunities, but we have to use them in a proper way. Thank you, Mr. Vasyl. Let me add just one small thing. Based on my experience of treatment of the patients, we become friends within these 10 years, where I'm seeing a huge gap and I'm getting focused on it. So everything that we're talking about here now, so our patients don't know a thing about this. There is no awareness policy for them to get all those services. What can I say? In the beginning, well, even before the full-scale invasion, our task, for example, every Thursday we had such an activity as sitting around with the director, and we talk with our patients about the necessity to enter into a declaration with the family doctors, some simple things, and they are not aware of that. What are the activities that they can attend? What are the centers? What are the veteran spaces working in the community? Well, this information exists somewhere, but for a person who undergoes a trauma, it's difficult for them to focus, to analyze, and for even to find it. If people are aware, they would use this information to their use, to their advantage. Our case managers, our social workers, if we find out that our patient gets registered in Khmelnytsky region, we provide them with a number of contacts in that region. What are the civil organizations? What are the support centers? What are the veteran spaces there? So this continuous support is the foundation of the support, specifically in the area of mental health treatment, and such information would never be excessive. We may provide a lot of platform analytical ones in one space, and they can be at the level of every single ministry and at the level of rehabilitation department. We have to put together a pool of contacts that people can take to good use. Well, let me add a little bit. I completely agree with Ms. Ksenia. We have to make our patients aware, and even the people who are not our patients, just so they know, just in case, where to go. It's really important, but again, let's not forget, there is such an important thing, a cool thing as National Healthcare Service dashboards, because people never ask themselves, like, where could I check out, where can I get that support in case I get some injury or I get traumatized? People don't do that, but if people undergo trauma, if they experience trauma, they hardly focus on looking for those tools. But those tools are available. People get informed, but sometimes they are just unfocused. But Ms. Ksenia mentioned such a position as the social worker. The law on Ukraine on rehabilitation in the area of healthcare contemplates the social worker becoming a part of multidisciplinary team, and they support people in orienting what to do next, like drawing some documents, explaining either how to renew their passport, what people can get in their communities, how to get in touch with the community, how to get in touch with the veteran centers. Again, this is the responsibility of social workers. We hope that thanks to the social workers whose responsibilities and whose positions are already contemplated as a position in hospitals, we will be able to overcome that information gap. Thank you, Mr. Ihor. Well, you've touched upon a number of cool topics. What is the queue for rehabilitation in our regional hospital? How many people are there in queue? Well, yours must be long, because everybody wants to come to your place for rehabilitation. Well, okay, so what is it? It's 30, 40, 50%, but it's a normal phenomena, I guess. What if a person is sent to rehabilitation for stationary rehabilitation and there is no space for them over there? Well, every week, every department of healthcare collects information about the load on the banks, and the availability of the banks around the country in average is about 1,500. So it's a matter of rerouting. Maybe some region may be more developed. When I was saying that cluster, the biggest rehabilitation capacity is in Dnipropetrovsk region. They have the biggest number of specialists and they have the biggest capacity. There are regions where there is no such capacity. And we try to expedite the process of establishment of rehabilitation departments in the cluster, in the multi-cluster hospitals. On our part, it's like a state intervention to force the owners of the institutions to establish the rehabilitation departments. So we understand that there are rehabilitation departments in multi-cluster facilities, like there is a multi-cluster hospital. 58% are already equipped with the rehabilitation departments. When they are added to the red, it will increase the availability. And talking about the therapists, currently among those contracted for stationary treatment, we have about 4,300 specialists with a capacity of 9,000 patients per day. Talking about the number graduated last year, it's 2,600. This year it's 3,700 physical therapists, bachelors and magisters. So there is a talent pool in Ukraine. I'm afraid that in a couple of years they wouldn't be able to find a proper job because the market will be saturated and probably the necessity for their services will be not as high. So how did we calculate the need? We did when we say that we're observing the standards, the international standards, and it was mentioned that in Ukraine not every experience fits for us. We asked the Israelis, how many rehabilitation banks do you have? It's the country waging a war. Well, maybe not so intense, but still. Well, they say that per 10 million we have 1,000 rehabilitation banks, so 100 banks per million of population. We understand that our warfare is more intense, our development is not as high, so we multiply this figure by 2. But again, even today, if we say that we need 200 banks, our number is even bigger. So it's a matter of adequate routing and canalizing of patients. Again, for example, the military may only undergo stationary rehabilitation, which complicates, adds some load on our system, because meanwhile people could be rehabilitated at home, they still stay at the hospital. But again, it's the responsibility of Ministry of Defense. Well, we are in communication with them, but again, if we let them go home for rehabilitation, there will be 1,500 additional banks being vacated. But again, let's not inflate the resource so it remains adequate to the needs. Well, but talking about the mental health, well, I have information about the physical rehabilitation. Maybe Ms. Ksenia can comment on that. Well, I've mentioned it already that the network is developing that is capable of providing psychosocial support, but it's not about difficult patients, For the time being, they require stationary support, and they do require it, because currently they have an opportunity to go to stationary departments, which are overloaded. All of the mental health facilities are overloaded. with people who survived imprisonment, tortures, and building of such centers in clinics, in Lviv region. They started doing it a mesh for you. With the support of this project, they've built already 4 such departments, but the system requires restructuring because it lacks biopsychosocial model. It's a problem now, and in coordination with the National Healthcare Service, we've initiated the development of the package that would include such multidisciplinary support within the framework of mental health support, probably in year 25. Well, not in 26. We were talking about the following year. Well, I don't have anybody to ask. This is why I'm going to ask you. The problem is huge. I understand. You understand how it boils inside of me. I'm not even talking about the veterans. I'm talking about the general picture. Well, in the same way you've asked about the military, and Vasyl says it right that they could be not inpatient, they could be treated in their communities, but the military are supposed to be inpatient. No, I'm talking about the veterans. For the military, it's impossible to end up in a mental health facility because the recommendation should be signed by the head of the medical service of brigade, because thus the brigade should recognize that they have people with mental health problems in their ranks. Well, I'm talking about the veteran community. We can work with them in a different way, but we cannot work with them because we don't have enough bunks. Even our mental health center in Transcarpathia, which becomes like super cluster hospital, we have 3 different institutions in a structure. Yeah, but look, not all of them should be psychiatric inpatients. Yeah, to do that we need the clinical psychologists, but we don't train clinical psychologists. There is no such specialty in our education system. Well, it can be a part of the package with the mobile teams, and more institutions contract these things. So in year 22 they were not so numerous, but now they contract new mobile teams and ambulatory personnel. Dear guests, I suggest we provide our journalists with an opportunity to ask questions. You had questions. Good afternoon, Vyacheslav Dumin. I'm the director of the Chesovet company, and it's not like a question. I would rather like to expand a little bit on improvement of rehabilitation. I'm the representative of national manufacturer of prosthetics, so we have enough specialists, we have resources. What we lack is the government policy, because manufacturing of a bionic prosthetic in Ukraine and procuring it abroad are whole different things, and we actually enrich someone else's economy rather than improving ours. Again, Ukrainian manufacturers could support us in doing it, but the essence is that the government pays no attention to the state manufacturer, to the Ukrainian manufacturer. Do we have any questions to our guests? Well, if there are no questions, may you provide more comments on the prosthetics? Or is it so that the Ukrainian manufacturers are not being paid enough attention? Well, it's all done through the prosthetic fund of Ukraine. There are specific funds that provide, there are foundations that provide financing for such programs. They come in in a sufficient quantity. Again, as a Ministry of Health, we cannot contact it, but I think it's the matter of interaction because the prosthetics are supposed to be undergone in Ukraine. I mean, the process itself, I think it's a matter of centralized procurement and the bid, the quality, the price. The question, please. Thank you very much for this event. My name is Vladislav. I represent Kyiv Hub Future, and I'm having a question to Mr. Vasyl. How did you calculate this rehabilitation multiplier to come to this logic of 200 banks in Ukraine? Well, let me explain you the logic. What was the problem we were facing? As a Ministry of Health, we were approached by a number of recreation facilities who were saying, we have 10 hectares of land, there are birds seen, we only need 500 million hryvnias. We had the deputies submitting requests to us, or some were saying, we have an American foundation who are ready to extend money for rehabilitation to us. Just we need a letter from you as a Ministry of Health, and we will build a beautiful rehabilitation center. So we had to set some limit, you know. Even with the absence of specialists, we cannot guarantee that there is a need for that. The need may be fluctuating, but analyzing the number of Israelis, we've assumed that we do not treat stroke as good as they do. Well, it's clear that in Israel they treat stroke way better than in Ukraine. Someday it will be treated better in Ukraine, I'm sure. Well, again, their dispensary network is way better, so this is why we set this limit of 200 to set the limit where we have state support, the centralized support, and we want to concentrate those 200 in the available network, the capable network. 920 or 295, the number that was mentioned, it's something regulated by the market because it's below that or above that limit. They have demand for rehabilitation. They've opened the department and they only calculate whether it would provide some return to them. So if it's a capable network, the calculation is 200. Well, I'm a physical theorist by education. I know about the model approach. The large-scale war in Ukraine results in the
порадним спілкуванням. Ще останнє питання з приводу є механізм моніторингу якості реабілітації. Бо навіть коли ми кажемо про велику кількість ліжкомісць, ми проводили
we're saying about a huge number of banks. We had a forum on rehabilitation, and there was a request from multiple military. They said there are rehabilitologists that we don't want to be treated by, but there are some that everybody wants to be treated by. But again, the mechanism of training of rehabilitologists. Well, thank you for your question. That's the most interesting. Our task is to implement the measurement for quality of rehabilitation. Some may work, some may not work with the patient properly, but we're working on it. We will implement the electronic scales, electronic measurement system of healthcare to understand whether there are positive changes with certain patients. Maybe we will come to publishing the ratings of rehabilitation facilities, saying like this rehabilitation facility is cool, this one is not, so don't go there, go there. Well, Miss Valeriya, just a minute for you. Well, first of all, I would like to thank Miss Ksenia for this comment about the fact that all of the problems that we've discussed here should be better communicated. But again, there are dashboards of National Healthcare Service for the whole system. But yet another problem I haven't heard the answer to. I said about prosthetics for a reason, because if you haven't seen them on the list, there is a lot of rehabilitation centers in Lviv and Lviv region. People go there because there are prosthetics, there are services there. And in Lviv, I met multiple people from eastern, southeastern regions who were coming there after difficult treatment, who were coming to Lviv, very far away from their homes, because there are no prosthetic centers all around Ukraine. Again, as I've mentioned, as a Ministry of Health, we are not responsible about that, but if we talk about prosthetics, the war created a challenge for us for prosthetics of the upper limb, because the correlation changed a lot during peacetime. Correlation between the loss of leg and loss of hand was 1 to 10 in average. During the war, 1/3 of losses is the loss of hand. And there is a lot of serious questions with prosthetic of hand. There was a very small number of specialists who could do the hand prosthetics. Now, thanks to the support of international partners, civil initiatives, their number has grown. The specialists are being trained. Talking about the leg prosthetics, there is no problem, you know about it. And in order to adequately communicate this issue with the Foundation for Social Protection of the Disabled, there are dozens of such centers, and the fact that people go to Lviv is more related to active communication campaign in Lviv, because in Lviv there is a number of centers who quite actively invest in PR communication, and people think like, oh, such centers exist in Lviv but don't exist in our place. They do exist, but it's just a matter of communication, again, with the Ministry of Defense, with the Ministry of Healthcare, with the Ministry of Social Policy. We work on not having everybody go to Lviv, because it creates overload on those centers, but so that they focus on their regional centers and get prosthetic services there. But people still have a right to choose. And again, it works through the word of mouth. There are very well advertised prosthetic centers, but apart from them, there are prosthetic centers which are not loaded at all. Well, I want to thank all of our guests for this interesting discussion. Let me remind you, we had a roundtable titled Success and Challenges of Rehabilitation of Military Personnel in Ukraine. Ukraine Media Center is working on putting together the schedule for further events. Stay tuned, and glory to Ukraine. Thank you.
Дякую дуже.